That's perfect right there. Great. So our next guest is a best-selling author on blockchain. In 2017, Don Tapscott co-founded the Blockchain Research Institute, whose more than 100 projects are the definitive investigation into blockchain technology, use case implementation, and organizational transformation. Since then, he wrote a book called The Supply Chain Revolution: How Blockchain Technology is Transforming the Digital Flow of Assets. And he is a member of the Order of Canada, ranked second most influential management thinker by Thinkers 50 in 2019. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Don Tapscott.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here, and I really mean that. You know, the last time I spoke at campus party, there were 15,000 people. And this program that you are watching is a program worthy of a 15,000 person audience. And I'd like to begin by congratulating each of you for getting your butts off a couch and actually coming somewhere to do something and participate in an actual event. So give yourself a big round of applause, would you? Good for you. The second thing I'd like to say is, Flavio, there he is, you are the man. And I want to be the first person to buy one of those cars if I can. I've had an electric vehicle for 7 years, and I have my third Tesla on order right now. Yes, there's a 7-month waiting list. But this is the future, and we need to reduce carbon by 80% in the next 20 years, or we're pretty much done as a species. So we're going to have to mobilize the whole world. Every company, every government, every NGO, every school, every kid in every schoolyard, and create a mass movement involving civilization. And there's nothing more important than to turn back the tide on climate change, and we can do it. You know, people ask me, is it possible? Is it too late? I say the future is not something to be predicted. The future is something to be achieved. And the stakes are too high to not achieve a desirable outcome. Aussi, j'aimerais faire cette présentation en français, mais rapidement, les francophones ici me demanderaient de la donner en anglais. So I'm going to speak in English, if that's okay. I actually lived in Montreal for a year. J'étais étudiant at McGill. That's another story for the bar sometime. So I'm going to talk to you about a very big idea today, actually a bunch of them. How a demand pull from the new business and social environment post-pandemic is creating an acceleration of the digital age, and how we have a technology push coming about from a completely new generation of technology that's different than we've had for the last half century. And these are coming together to transform every industry like never before. I want to talk to you frankly about the challenges of making this happen and make a personal appeal to each of you to find that leader within you for change. Let me begin by talking about this. It's a picture of Toronto during the lockdown. The pandemic has sped up the digital age by years and even decades in some places. We're all working online. We're shopping online like never before. We're learning online, an idea that's been around for a long time. We're all exercising online with our Pelotons. We're all managing our health online, and doctors are doing diagnoses online. Criminals are being tried online. We're socializing online. And there's a side of this that's very positive, because many of these changes were long overdue. And there's a side of this that's also quite negative, because there's still a role for the physical world in human interaction. And you think about something like retail. You know, 6 months before the pandemic, I walked the streets of Madison Avenue in New York, and every third store was closed already because of the impact of big box, but more the internet on retail. Now, every 2 stores out of 3 along Madison Avenue are closed. Will they come back? And if they do, what will they look like? The pandemic has also shown with searing clarity some of the weaknesses in our current systems and our infrastructures, and for that matter, in our governments and leaders. Those leaders that have failed will be or have been replaced. And the pandemic has also shown that our systems, for example, our supply chains, are woefully inadequate. How can it be that today we have a supply chain crisis in this day and age? How can it be that our health data is all in little silos and we can't aggregate it together in an anonymized way to stop a pandemic in its tracks before it gets started? Many of our systems have failed us. It's time for profound change. Now, combined with that, there's also a technology push from a second era of technology. I'm going to show you a video I haven't shown in a very long time. And you remember George Stroumboulopoulos had a TV show? He had me on the show once on CBC, and they asked me to do a little clip about how I got started in technology, and I'm aging myself here, in the 1970s at Bell Northern Research in Canada. So here's the clip.
Something you might not know about Canada.
Hi, I'm Don Tapscott, and before the break, I promised to tell you about the digital office. In the 1970s, the coolest decade of all time, the office was full of strange things like typewriters, dictaphones, adding machines, and mimeographs. Telephones were connected to a wire, so people could only reach you when you were in the office. God, I miss that. Not now! In 1978, the Canadian company Bell Northern Research wondered what would happen if every desk had a computer on it connected to a vast internetwork. Their incredibly handsome staff created an office that used crazy things like email, word processing, texting, and document management. Then B&R pitted the computerized workers against the computerless old-school test group. This first ever controlled experiment proved that the digital workers were more efficient, innovative, and effective. And they had more fun, too. And within only 15 years, office workers across the globe were playing electronic solitaire and watching cat videos to their heart's content. And that's something you might not know about Canada.
So, a little background on this second era. 1978, I was using a network called the ARPANET that became the internet. And over those more than 40 years, we've gone through a first era of the digital age. Mainframes, mini computers, PCs, the internet, the web, the mobile web, social media, the cloud, big data. And now we're entering a second era. I wrote a couple of books on that experience in the 1980s that nobody read. My mother bought most of the copies. But I started writing bestsellers in the early 1990s. Paradigm Shift, which is obviously a big book, and then The Digital Economy, which they say was the first bestseller about the web in business. And throughout that first era, technology had a certain truck and trade and objective. We're now moving into a second era. And this second era has a whole number of technologies that are very different. We have technologies that can learn, AI, machine learning, learn to do things that they weren't programmed to do. Technology is infusing itself through the physical world. Users are not just humans, but billions, soon trillions of inert objects that become animated. We have autonomous vehicles, we're just talking about that, distributed energy, and so on. And I became convinced when I was writing the 20th anniversary edition of the Digital Economy that the foundational technology for all of this was in fact the underlying technology of cryptocurrencies or blockchain. And the reason I concluded that is, along with my son Alex, we decided that this is really the second era of the internet. For the first internet was an internet of information, right? But if I send you some information, an email, a PDF of this deck, which you're welcome to have, I'm actually not sending you the information, I'm sending you a copy. Even with the website, I keep the original. But when it comes to things that really matter to, say, the Canadian economy, assets, things of value like money, security, stocks, bonds, swaps, derivatives, and so on. The assets like the data in our identities or intellectual property, cultural assets like art or music, or votes. A vote is an asset, something of value that belongs to somebody. When it comes to assets, copying those is a bad idea, right? You don't want someone copying your vote or your identity. And if I send you $1,000, it's really important that I don't still have the money, right? So cryptographers have called this the double spend problem. And the way that we manage this problem in our economy is through intermediaries, banks, governments, credit card companies, stock exchanges, transfer agents, escrow agents, social media companies. They perform all of the business and transaction logic of every type of commerce. They identify the party, you are who you are. They identify the asset, that's a stock. They clear and settle transactions. They keep records, and overall they've done a pretty good job. But there are growing problems. What if there were not just an internet of information? What if there were an internet of value? Some kind of vast global distributed ledger where anything of value, from money to securities to art to a vote, could be managed, stored, transacted in a secure and private way. That's what Satoshi Nakamoto solved. Satoshi solved the double spend problem. And Bitcoin was just the beginning. But now the underlying technology of blockchain is extraordinary because for the first time in human history, people can trust each other to do commerce peer-to-peer. And trust is not achieved by an intermediary. It's achieved by cryptography, by collaboration, and by some clever code, which is why we call it the trust protocol. Now, I had a very clever analogy for why blockchains were more secure than traditional central servers. But you know the late night TV show by John Oliver, American comedian? He got me on his show and he had some fun with my analogy. So I'm going to play that for you, and you see why I don't use the analogy anymore.
And because of the complicated process the network uses to verify records, it is very secure. Now, relax. I'm not going to get into what that process is or how it works, but I will share a really helpful, really dumb metaphor for why it is safe.
The way I like to think of it is that a blockchain is a highly processed thing, sort of like a chicken McNugget. And if you wanted to hack it, it'd be like turning a chicken McNugget back into a chicken. Now, someday someone will be able to do that, but for now, it's going to be tough.
Hold on. That is an absolutely horrible thought. So why is that reporter so happy about the idea? Because if anyone ever figures out how to turn a chicken McNugget back into a chicken, that chicken is going to be up. He's going to spend the rest of his life suffering from PTSD and writing haunting poetry about the experience. The things I saw, buck, buckaw. My body is whole, but what of my soul?
So you can see why I don't use the analogy anymore. I still think it's a pretty good analogy, though. So Bitcoin was the first app of the Internet of Value. What was the first app of the Internet of Information? Anybody think of that? Email. Yeah, it was email. And email was to the Internet of Information like Bitcoin was to the Internet of Value. But now we have these new general purpose platforms where you can build any app. They look more like the World Wide Web. Hyperledger from the Linux Foundation. Ethereum. Does anyone know what's the most successful startup ever in Canadian history? Shopify? Nortel? It's Ethereum. Ethereum is worth more than all 5 Canadian banks combined. Ask any Canadian, what's Ethereum? They won't know what the most successful startup in the entire history of this country is in terms of value. We don't get this yet. Now, an important thing about Ethereum is it introduced the notion of smart contracts. If you're a programmer, who here is an actual programmer, coder, develop applications? Okay, you need to know about this. Smart contracts are going to be the foundation of every business process. And they are just like what they sound like. They're an agreement made of software that self-executes, polices itself, has a bank built into the software. And now, there are a whole new level of extraordinary new platforms that are emerging. Things like Cosmos, the internet of blockchains, combining blockchains together. Polkadot, a bold vision of the Web 3, a worldwide web where value can be exchanged. These are the platforms that represent the future operating system for business and for the corporation. Now, I want to introduce one other word today. It's the first time I've used this word in a speech, and I've saved it for Campus Party. Trivergence. These are the 3 technologies that matter going forward. Everything else is a derivative. Autonomous vehicles are a derivative of this. Drones are a derivative of trivergence. We have blockchain as the foundation, combining with AI, machine learning, and the Internet of Things. Remember that word trivergence. You heard it here first. Remember the first time you heard the word, I don't know, the singularity or the digital economy. I hope that this will become a term that's widely understood. And I'm just about to publish a major article about it. So, I did get lucky with the timing of this book, also with my co-author, my son, Alex. And we just heard from the publisher that this book has surpassed all of my previous books. And it sold more copies than any other, than all the other books on blockchain combined. So if you're going to get this book, get the new edition that has a yellow banner across the top. So, what's going on? Is this for real? Is it really affecting the world? I'm going to spend a minute on a number of important transformations. Financial services, changing supply chains, healthcare, energy and climate, property rights, identity, government, and democracy. A word on each one. First of all, money is becoming digital. We don't have digital money today. We have banks that have big computer systems that have messaging systems that points to the ownership of funds which reside in large computers. But you don't actually have the money. You're not the bearer of the money. If you have cash in your pocket, that's a bearer instrument. Well, we're moving to a situation where money is becoming digital and you will be the bearer of that money. Now we have the self-organizing platforms like Bitcoin. Then there are the corporate platforms like Facebook's DM. And you can bet if DM is successful, Jeff Bezos is not going to have people paying Facebook money on Amazon. He'll be building his own currency. And then there's the central banks, digital currencies. But this is a little picture of the world and just how these, overall, these cryptocurrencies are being adopted. And we now have several countries that have accepted Bitcoin as an actual official currency for the country. Diem, if that's successful, and it's a big if, this would immediately bring 500 million people into the global financial system. A lot of people are down on Facebook, and I got my issues with Facebook going way back. But this initiative, if done correctly and regulated properly, could have a huge positive impact on the world. Imagine being able to send a housekeeper in Montreal to send money to her mom in Manila as easily as sending a text message. Right now, she has to go to a Western Union office and she gets charged 10 to 20%. It takes 4 to 6 days for the money to get there. That would be extraordinary. It would also mean that a number of unbanked people would become banked. Now, the really big one is actual fiat currencies. The digital dollar, the digital euro, the digital pesos. And this is happening now very rapidly around the world. And Canada is experimenting with this. The big one that everyone's concerned about is China's CBDC. It's called DCEP. China's rolling this out around the world. They're leading. They're rolling it into Southeast Asia, into One Belt, One Road, linking Hong Kong and Rotterdam, into Africa. If they're successful, the Chinese currency, the RMB, will replace the US dollar as the currency of record. So the stakes are very high here for the United States to wake up. Will they? Well, we'll get to that in a second. But it's not just money, it's the whole financial industry, which is the foundation of every economy that's changing. This is a machine. Anybody recognize this machine? It has a name. It's an example of something called a Rube Goldberg machine. Rube Goldberg was an American cartoonist and engineer, and he built all these ridiculously complicated systems like this that would do something very simple like crack an egg or open a door. That's what the industry is. This huge, complicated, hundreds of, or trillions and trillions of dollars. But really, when all is said and done, the industry does 9 things. They store value. It used to be in big safes. Now it's in computer systems, money, stocks, whatever. They move value, moving money, moving stocks, doing transactions. Because they can store and move value, they get to lend value. So retail lending, commercial lending, and so on. They fund and invest value. So you got venture capital, private equity, mutual funds, hedge funds, and so on. They exchange value, markets, stock exchanges, right? They insure value, big insurance companies, the reinsurers. They analyze value. There's a whole industry now analyzing the stock market and money and currencies and commodities and so on. They account for and audit value, the big audit companies, and they authenticate identity. You are who you are. This is what it is. This is what the industry does. Not that simple. Now, in our book, Financial Services Revolution, and in a new book coming out by Alex Tapscott in December called The Digital Asset Revolution, he goes through and he analyzes how every one of these functions is being replaced by software. Imagine a world without banks. Now that's not going to happen because the banks are working hard to re-intermediate to create new value in the middle. But this is a time of very profound change, and the opportunity for our economy is extraordinary. Reducing all that overhead, all that cost, and all that value that's being sucked out of society to a tiny handful of massive, wealthy banks and their extremely wealthy executives. Now, the other thing that's happening here is we have the biggest digitization of assets ever in human history. By the way, that's often called DeFi. You heard of fintech? Fintech is like this. DeFi is like this. Fintech is tinkering with the old model of financial services. DeFi is replacing it with software. DeFi is the fastest growing industry in the world today. It's doubling every 6 weeks. And DEFI stands for distributed finance. Now, I don't have time to go through this, but the new edition of the Blockchain Revolution discusses this. But we have currencies. There are many different types of tokens. Those are different than protocol tokens like Ether. Ether is a protocol token that enables the network to work. You have non-fungible tokens, NFTs. The idea of the tokenization of art was introduced 6 years ago in Blockchain Revolution in an entire chapter. We called them crypto collectibles. They're all securities tokens are the biggest one. All securities will become tokens. There was a token generation event 2 years ago that raised $1 billion. There was no investment bank, no stock market, and no stock. The individuals invested in tokens that represented a share of the company. So this is a huge thing that's underway today. Look at this. From nothing 7, 8 months ago to a $200 billion industry today. You can get this today on Amazon.ca. The best way to get it is in massive volume. Christmas is coming soon. You look like people with friends. Do you have employees? Buy this book. No, seriously, it's an excellent piece of work. Now, the second one is supply chains. This is unbelievable. It's a massive crisis of being addressed by the President of the United States as the #1 challenge facing America today, the disintegration of supply chains. Something's wrong here. What do we got? Well, you got all these different partners working together in planes and boats and trains and trucks and pipelines, and then you got various players. You got borders and escrow agents and tax authorities, and then there are all this information moving around, and email and traditional EDI and ERP and paper and phone calls and faxes. Imagine if that were all a shared network state, a single ledger with a single version of the truth, where the settlements were real time. There was no 3-day delay between the payment and the settlement, because the payment and the settlement's the same activity. It's just a change to the ledger. Blockchain will be the foundation of the new supply chain. And I'm running out of time here, but you can read about all these or go to blockchainresearchinstitute.org. But you know, it used to take Walmart 3 months to find out where a poison avocado came from. Now they can do it in 20 seconds. Do you know that 40% of the fish you eat in a restaurant in Montreal is incorrectly labeled? It's cheap fish being sold as expensive fish, or endangered fish being sold as okay fish. Well, there's a big project underway to transform that entire industry so that you'll be able to know where your fish came from and what it ate, and probably who its parents were. And you'll certainly be able to see all kinds of ratings about the fish and so on. And we got very lucky on the timing of this book, Supply Chain Revolution, because it came out after the pandemic had started. And it's the first book to talk about the transformation of supply chains for a pandemic. Healthcare. There are 5 big parts of this industry that are being transformed by the TRIVERGENCE overall. You think about something like a hospital with hundreds of smart communicating devices, the Internet of Things, where these devices are learning, analyzing data, and where increasingly transactions are being done on a blockchain. But a really big one is the health record. So at the University Health Network in Toronto, which by the way is the 3rd ranked hospital in the world, I'm a patient there and I have something called my UHN. And before I leave the hospital after an x-ray, my radiology report is available to me. The next step is to put that on a blockchain so that I own my healthcare record. And I can anonymize it and give it to science or get a second opinion, or I could sell it if I want. Patients should own their own data, and this should be done in a standardized way so that we can aggregate anonymized healthcare records for social causes, like, say, to fight a pandemic. We all know about this one, a huge challenge. And increasingly, power grids are becoming distributed with green sources of power, and they need a transactional platform. So when that light bulb buys some power on an open power market, and it promptly pays for the power, which results in its reputation as a trustworthy device being established, that transaction is not going to go through Visa, okay? The distributed energy grid needs a distributed ledger, and the Internet of Everything needs a ledger of everything to be able to manage all of those transactions. It's not a theory, as it was 6 years ago when we wrote Blockchain Revolution. It's happening today. The other thing, of course, is that we can tokenize carbon credits. So imagine that. You go to a store here in Montreal and you buy an espresso machine. You buy the green machine because it comes with green tokens that are kind of like a loyalty point, only they're really powerful. They're fungible. You can exchange them. You can turn them into other stuff. You can turn them into Canadian dollars if you want. This is how we're going to mobilize the planet, not by more lectures from Greta Thunberg, but bless her heart for doing that. People are going to get motivated because of economic considerations, and blockchain is now beginning to do that. Do you know that 70% of the land titles in the developing world are not enforceable? You're a farmer in Honduras and a dictator comes to power, it's really happened, and he says, well, you may have a piece of paper that says you own your farm, but the government computer, centralized computer, says my friend owns your farm. And eventually he was thrown out of power. But this is happening all around the world. It's 80% in India. You know, your parents pass away, you go to the land titles office because in the will it says that you inherit the land, and somebody's bribed the local clerk for $100, and you no longer own your land, you're paying rent on your land, you have no recourse to fight that. So you put land titles on a blockchain, as is being done in the Haryana Land Registry now in Haryana, India, and nobody can mess with that. No dictator, no corrupt clerk, unless they know how to turn a chicken McNugget back into a chicken. Sorry, I wasn't going to use that analogy. So, number 6, identity. I'm sorry, what's your name? Lauren? Mark. Mark. Okay, the virtual Mark knows more about Mark than he does. A lot of areas. He can't remember exact location a year ago, or what he bought a year ago, or what medication he took, or what diagnosis he had, or what he got on a test. There's a virtual image of each of us being created online, this trail of digital crumbs that we leave as we travel through life. And Mark created that data, came out of his body, his behavior, his whatever, but it gets captured by a tiny handful of digital conglomerates, a new species of business, unlike anything that we've ever seen before. Do you know that 6 of these companies are now half of the value of NASDAQ? They're 20% of the entire S&P 500 stock market. And Mark creates the data, but he doesn't get to own it. So what does that mean? Well, some people say his privacy is being undermined. That's a big problem. But it's a lot more than that. It means that he can't use this data to plan his life. He can't monetize it. They're getting rich from his data. It means his data is not secure. It's going to be hacked. There's two types of central servers, those that have been hacked and those that will be hacked. And his data can't get aggregated to, say, fight a pandemic. And Mark's privacy is being undermined. And, you know, people say to me, well, Don, privacy's dead. Get over it. If you got nothing to hide, what's your problem? This is stupidity. Privacy is the foundation of freedom. And all this data represents our identities. We need to get our identities back so that we can manage them responsibly for ourselves and our families. So, imagine a world. You don't have to imagine, because there are thousands of people working on this today. The notion of a self-sovereign identity, the virtual mark that he owns. And it sweeps up all this data into his wallet, into his identity, and he can use it to plan his life, monetize it, do whatever he wants. Climate change is number one. We don't fix that. We don't get to exist as a species. Number two is our identity. If we don't roll back and recapture our identities, we don't get to exist as a civilization, because this is the foundation of prosperity and it's the foundation of freedom. You should all care about this and get informed. Finally, government. Well, reinventing government. The internet was supposed to do that. Anyone think that the internet has fundamentally transformed government for the better? I don't know. We kind of paved the cow path, didn't we? Well, now there are countries all around the world. Canada's a little slow, unfortunately, that are embracing this technology. But we're working to fix that in this country. It's not just government, it's democracy. We have a crisis of legitimacy of our democratic institutions today. Legitimacy is the notion that you may not like who's in power, but at least you think the system's a good one. A third of Americans think that the last election was stolen. The most scrutinized election, probably not just in US history, but in any country ever. They know down to every vote in every precinct in every state. They know with certainty what happened, and it's all gone through the courts, and all the parties have reviewed it. A third of the Americans, somebody says the vote was stolen, a third of Americans believe them. It's a result of the fragmentation of public discourse. It's a whole other problem I'm happy to talk about. Now, how are we going to fix this? Well, one of the big problems is that politicians are not accountable to citizens, right? 94% of Americans want to see a background check for firearms purchases, but Congress can't pass a law saying that because they're not accountable to the citizens. They're accountable to the people who put them into power, the funders. So how can we fix this? We need a new era of democracy. First wave, we established these representative institutions. They were pretty good, a lot better than kings and nobles and so on running things. But there was a weak public mandate. Citizens were passive, and representatives are beholden to powerful interests. Could we move to a second era enabled by technology where we could have transparency, sunlight being a great disinfectant for this whole thing? Culture of public deliberation where citizens are active and where representatives are accountable to citizens. Now, technology is not going to fix this. People fix problems, not technology. But we now have a second kick at the can here. Imagine a smart vote. You can have smart money. Soon you send your kid to university, you give him some money for books and tuition. You hope that he spends it on books and tuition. He goes into the bar, orders a margarita, and the money says, sorry, Johnny, I don't do margaritas, I only do books and tuition, right? Why can't you have a smart vote where you're voting not just for the politician, you're voting for his or her program, their program? And if they don't implement the program, there are consequences. Maybe funds don't flow. Maybe they don't get paid. Maybe they get recalled, whatever. So this is a very exciting time. These are 7 of 30 industries that we're looking at the Blockchain Research Institute. And I can tell you this is happening. I'm happy to discuss that more. So, if Silicon Valley was the center of the first era of the digital age, where's the second center going to be? Well, these are the kinds of things that matter. You need government support. How great that Montreal, province of Quebec, and the government of Canada supported this event. You know, we have to have an event, and finally we did in this industry. I think it's the first one in the country. This is a stake in the ground. A lot of people are going to watch the video and they're going to say, geez, I wish I was at that thing. And that's great. You want to have a big domestic market. That gives China a big advantage. Regulatory clarity and openness. The number one problem in all of this going ahead is the regulators don't get it. Some do in Canada. What's the ecosystem look like in a city like Montreal? One of the 8 countries I'm going to in the next 3 weeks is Switzerland. I'm going to Zurich and Zug, where they have 15,000 people working in the blockchain space, full-time developers, building systems. Banking landscape. Well, Canadian banks are not very open to this stuff. Thought leadership, funding for entrepreneurship. Well, the Canadian government had the infrastructure program. Anyway, these are the kinds of things that you need to do to build an ecosystem. But this is not just about building a Silicon Valley, a sector, but this technology, TRIVERGENCE, is really the foundation of all sectors. So we need a wake-up call in Canada. Well, I'm running out of time, so I'm going to wrap it up. Challenges to this going forward too. This is taking a while. You know, Fred Smith, founder of FedEx, I was interviewing him at Consensus. There were 4,000 people in the audience and another 4,000 outside the room trying to get in. And I did the opening talk there, and then I interviewed him. This is in New York, and he says, you know, back in the day, we figured out chain of custody. That idea. We built a system where we could track packages, stuck our logo on it, went to market, dominated the industry. You can't do that today. We want to rebuild the whole industry around blockchain, but we have to work with all our partners and even our competitors to make that happen. This is going to take some time. But the fact that it's taking time, don't be confused that this is not happening. Au contraire, the opposite is occurring, that these changes are so profound, they're going to take a while. Technology, scalability. The internet is a network of similar networks. Blockchains are all different. We need Cosmos and Polkadot and these platforms that are integrating them. Blockchain has an image problem. I'm happy to talk about that if you want. And overall, how do we steward this resource going forward? How do we in this room work together to make it happen? Let me close with this thought. Leaders of old paradigms have difficulty embracing the new. And I put together this little slide for you of famous last words. Ken Olsen. I'm old enough to remember in '77, where he was the CEO of the largest computer company in the world, Digital Equipment Corporation. And he said there's no reason why anyone should have a personal computer in his home. Well, they're gone. They were gone pretty fast, too. The PC wiped them out. So how are we going to find leadership for change? You know, when a new paradigm comes along, it causes dislocation, conflict, uncertainty. New paradigms are nearly always received with coolness. I'm guessing because you came out to this event, everyone in this room knows what it's like to be received with coolness when you introduce a new idea. Vested interests fight against change, and leaders of the old have great difficulty embracing the new. Leadership does not typically come from the top, or at least it doesn't start there. It comes from you. And we need to create organizations that can learn, and anyone can be a leader. Check out the Blockchain Research Institute. We're blockchainresearchinstitute.org. There are millions and millions of dollars of free reports and insights and tools available that we've made available to the world. Also, if you want to learn more about this, the biggest course on blockchain in the enterprise, we provide that. We have 100,000 learners on Coursera, and it's in partnership with INSEAD. Can we do this? Well, the stakes are too high to not do it. And I'd like to end, if I could, with an analogy. At the Institute, studied thousands of organizations. We're also studying nature to try and understand these new decentralized models of creating value. Fish come in swarms. Bees come in swarms. Fish come in schools. Starlings, some places in the world, over the moors in England, come in something called a murmuration. Murmuration. Do you know that word? Have you heard that word? It's a word in the dictionary. It refers to the murmuring of the wings of the birds. And starlings are out over a 20-mile radius throughout the day doing their starling thing. And at night they come together and they create the spectacular thing. Look on the right of the screen here. That's a hawk. 25 times the size of a starling, a predator chasing away the little birds through their collective power. And scientists that have studied this say they've never seen an accident. There's leadership, but there's no one leader. And when the moment is right, this magic happens. Now, is this some kind of, I don't know, fanciful analogy? Or could you actually learn something from it about trivergence? Well, there's no middleman. Remember I said trust is not achieved by an intermediary, but by collaboration, that's this, and by some clever code. There's code in the DNA of the birds that gives them rules. Don't bump into anybody else, that's a rule. Don't get too far away, that's another rule. The murmuration has what we call an interdependence. That's what we need, a declaration of interdependence for a new economy, that we are all connected. And the murmuration functions as if the interests of an individual bird are connected to the interests of the murmuration as a whole. And finally, the murmuration has a great integrity. Integrity being the foundation of trust. What is trust? Could you define trust? I wrote a book about this. It took me 3 months to write this sentence. Trust in business is the expectation that the other party will act with integrity. Trust is the expectation that the other party will act with integrity, that they will do the right thing, that they'll be honest, considerate of your interests, abide by their commitments. And that's why a little tiny bird will chase after a killer 25 times its size, because it knows the other birds will do the right thing and have its back. Imagine if we connect ourselves on this planet with some kind of new vast network of glass and air and code and cryptography. What kind of intransigent problems could we solve? I look at this and I get a lot of hope, actually, that this smaller, more decentralized world that my grandchildren may inherit could actually be a better one. And that this age of networked intelligence is an age where the promise of digital is finally fulfilled. Thank you very much.
That was so incredible. Can you
sit down
join
for a
us for a quick Q&A? I'm sad we only have 5 minutes with you. That was an incredible presentation. Thank you so much. But I did want to include the people who are watching from the internet. I have a question here that asks, what is Canada doing to be like Silicon Valley of the second era? Are we doing enough?
No. Those 10 things that I listed, we're kind of good on half of them. We need a better regulatory environment, regulatory clarity, and regulators who understand that this is fundamentally a good thing that needs to be managed. To get the balance right between protecting investors on the one hand and innovation on the other. We need the big banks to wake up. The Canadian government does not get blockchain. We get AI. Canada doesn't get blockchain. You ask any Canadian, what's the big technology for the future? They're going to say AI, aren't they? Some of them might say quantum, which is kind of a processing technology. It's got nothing to do with the actual transformation of our institutions and prosperity. So we need a wake-up call in this country. We've not taken steps, other than UHN in Toronto, which has been very bold, to integrate blockchain into our healthcare system, and things overall are moving much too slowly. So Canada, wake up. TRIVERGENCE is here. Let's embrace this, because it's the foundation of prosperity, of solving intractable problems like climate change, and building good and open government.
Okay, thank you. The next question has to do with sort of two areas where blockchain could be implemented. How do you feel that schools and universities are doing to prepare or implement blockchain or prepare people to use it? And why do you think the healthcare industry is so slow? These are two different industries, but they both are sort of asking the same question.
Well, healthcare for the last 2 years, you know Maslow's hierarchy of needs? You know, you have safety and food and shelter, and then once you got that, you can have esteem, and then you can have self-actualization and love and all kinds of, well, the healthcare industry has been at the very bottom level trying to fight the pandemic. You know, if a tiger is chasing you, the fact that nobody loves you, it's not a big problem at that particular moment. And the healthcare industry has had a tiger chasing it. So I'm going to cut them some slack. But ultimately, they can't fix the problems of data and the patient record without a blockchain. I'm sorry, the other one was?
The other one was universities.
Oh, universities. Wow, this is a big opportunity because the student record could be owned by students. And that would be the foundation for a whole new model of education, which is that students are not just the passive recipients of education by a single university, but they are co-creators of their own knowledge in collaboration with educational institutions all around the world, if we had that record and it was portable.
Okay.
So it's been very slow. Now we're about to announce a big project with the City of Toronto to take blockchain into the schools and universities in Toronto.
Ooh, well, stay tuned for this. Unfortunately, we only have time for one more question here, so I'm going to choose this one because I think it's good. But it seems like blockchain still has an image problem, is what this commenter is noticing. What do we do to get more endorsement, to get people to wake up, and to get people to embrace it?
Well, a lot of the image problem is based on false information. Huh. I mean, what's the image problem? Bitcoin is used by criminals. Actually, maybe 1% of Bitcoin is used for nefarious purposes, but 3% of cash is used for nefarious purposes. Cash is the foundation of organized crime, the drug industry, tax evasion, has evaporation and spillage. So the big currency used by criminals is money, you know, traditional money. Furthermore, criminals are always the first to adopt exciting new technologies. The flip phone, you know, the automobile, Al Capone, and so on. So this is just false. And sure, there are scammers. That's okay. There are scammers all over the place, and we need good regulation that doesn't kill the baby when it's throwing out the bathwater. Blockchain and crypto have image problems in other ways, some of them being valid. The energy used is unsustainable.
Right.
Well, that's partially true. 50% of Bitcoin comes from traditional energy sources. The proof of work mechanism, that's a lot of energy. But 50% is located near wind farms and green water, hydroelectric and green sources because they're cheap sources. 50% of a big problem is still a big problem. But you can now go and invest in Bitcoin that's carbon neutral.
Okay.
So the BITC, phone up your broker and say, I want to buy the BITC ETF. Actually, I shouldn't be saying phone up your broker because I don't give investment advice, okay? But there is a green Bitcoin ETF. First one in the world is based in Canada.
Wow.
And it comes from a company called 9 Point Partners, full disclosure, for which my son Alex is the managing director of digital assets. So you can go through a bunch of these image problems, and there may be some truth to some of them, but overall there's just a problem of either lack of knowledge or of vested interests that want to stop this thing and are putting mud all over the windshield.
Right.
So it's all about becoming informed.
Okay, well, I hope that all the government officials and people in power who are listening get your book. Don, thank you so much for coming to Campus Party Canada again. It was a pleasure having you. Let's give a warm round of applause
Great,
for
thank
Don
you.
Tapscott. Thank you.